This is part 2 of the podcast on the Renaissance.
There's also a rebirth of the arts, which I've already kind of been talking about. There's some important pictures or pieces of art that you need to know. Michelangelo, very famous, very influential artist. These two here are from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. And the top picture there is the picture of the whole ceiling. It's basically a bunch of different scenes from the creation account in Genesis in the Bible. And this bottom one is called The Creation of Adam. Very famous painting that you probably recognize. Michelangelo didn't only paint, but he was a brilliant sculptor. He has a very famous sculpture called the David, which is David with it's a white marble guy with a sling over his back, and he's naked and all that, and they were into that type of thing, I guess. But no, that's kind of in the old. See, that's another example of how they're going back to these ancient, just like they went back in the literature to the Greek and Roman things. They're also going back in the art. The sculpture is all Greek and Roman-esque type of art. And so that's the kind of the rebirth of those things. And Michelangelo is a good example of how individual achievement was something that was highly valued during the Renaissance. Individual achievement, and the artist was really kind of a creative genius. Another example of that is Leonardo Da Vinci, who we saw earlier, the Mona Lisa. He was very interested in the human body. He did all kinds of dissections of people to try to understand what human anatomy was like. You may have seen the sketchings that he had of like a sort of helicopter device that he was thinking of in his mind. So you have these brilliant, creative, genius-like artists that were at this time, began to come around and began to experiment and begin to observe and have all these different ideas, about the world. Here's another famous painting by Raphael, The School of Athens. If you look in the middle there, it's supposed to be on the right Aristotle and on the left Plato, and Aristotle pointing down, Plato pointing up, because Plato was more concerned with basically the things above and kind of how everything is a form, and the real thing is something that is kind of above an ideal, whereas Aristotle was more interested in the things of this world and things like that. This is also a great example of perspective. As you can see, the archways and everything kind of goes to a vanishing point in the center, and it looks very, realistic, three-dimensional. That's another example of innovations in art that took place during this time. So I think this is one of the last things. Realistic political philosophy began to emerge during this time. Does anybody? How about we do this? I'll put up this guy's name, Machiavelli. Who can tell me what the name of the book is that this guy wrote that's very famous and popular? Does anybody know the name of the book? For a Piece of Pizza. Well, Machiavelli's the author. What's the name of what he wrote?
So somebody might remember.
Give us a hint.
I think I know one word.
It starts with a P. All right, it's he wrote the yeah.
Oh, I thought it was more than just the print.
Oh, get a piece of pizza. You got it, man. All right. Well, he wrote The Prince, and the reason this is realistic political philosophy is that basically in The Prince he argued that a ruler or a prince their rule is all about power. It's based on power, and so it's not about justice. It's not about truth. It's not about ruling with integrity or chivalry, as the knights in the Middle Ages. They had this code of honor. He said, no, it's not about all those things. A ruler should be concerned about one thing, and that's power, and that's making sure that he has control, and making sure that people who are coming against him are suppressed and put down. And so this was totally revolutionary up to this point. People just didn't talk like this. They didn't have ideas like this. As far as this realistic way of looking at things, where it's all about power, it's not about truth and beauty and justice and all of these things. So that was a major shift that began to take place in the political ideology during the Renaissance. There also was a northern Renaissance that occurred north of Italy, and It was delayed. It happened after the Renaissance in Italy, mostly because of the Black Death in the 14th century, which had it was devastating for all of Europe. There was about a third of every person in Europe died because of it, because of this plague. And so that delayed the economic growth, and it slowed the process a little bit. But eventually the north of Europe also experienced a type of Renaissance, which was similar. It was similar to the Renaissance in Italy, but it was more religious in focus. And there's a famous guy who you don't need to know about him for the exam, but Desiderius Erasmus was a monk who was very influential. He was part of the Christian humanists, which they were similar to the humanists that we talked about earlier, except they were more concerned about things having to do with the church. Erasmus wrote several satires, which were kind of like comedies used to make a point, usually about politics or about the church. He wrote one called In Praise of Folly, where he criticized the Pope, saying that the Pope has all this power, all this wealth, all this prestige, but he's not acting like the Holy Father that he's supposed to be acting like. He's not acting humble. He is taking advantage of his position. And so he really criticized some of the things within the church. He also, in 1516, the Greek New Testament, he went around and gathered all the different manuscripts from the Greek that the Bible was written in, the New Testament part of the Bible was written in. He gathered them together and compiled one kind of like manuscript that had everything in one place. And this was revolutionary, because up until this point, everyone only read the Bible in Latin, because Jerome, which centuries before, had translated the Bible into Latin. It was called the Vulgate translation. And so when Erasmus does this, he's basically going to the actual source, the original language that the text was written in order that people could go not to the Latin, but go to the original source to understand the meaning of the text. And that will lead into the Reformation later.